No, I don't want to. That's right, Tim. It's good. Guess I don't know. There we go. Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Health Committee on Transportation. Today is Wednesday, May 1st at about 11:05. And as we wind down our work for the year, we have the privilege today of having a conversation with Dr. Rosengold of UVM. We met Dr. Rosengold last week. We were on a excursion, field trip, learning experience to Beta and then UVM labs. And we had a great conversation with Dr. Rosengold over there while we were in his conference room of his lab, virtual lab. And so we invited him back today to fill us in some more. He brought some documents with him that are posted on our committee page. So Dr. Rosengold, we want to come up and plug his computer back in, and floor is yours.
All right.
Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
Is the best thing to sit here? I don't know. You get your screen or can
You can sit, stand, you can do whatever you want.
Yes.
Yeah. It's better to walk here.
All right.
If you get nervous, you can get up. Walk.
To walk around, but
This is your, and I understand this is your first trip, official trip to Montpelier.
yeah, it's my first trip to Montpelier. You know, I came here right before the pandemic, and then everything's virtual. I've talked with the Senate Transportation Committee before. It's always online. So
Yeah, so welcome to the real thing.
It's the worst.
Very happy to have you
I'm
here.
impressed, huh?
no, this is exciting.
As you can see, we're not a very comfortable group, but somehow we get things done. So go right ahead.
All right. So I've got some slides. I can go through them fairly quickly. You can interrupt me if you want. I can take questions at the end, however we want to do. We can skip around if there's certain things we want to talk about. I put together just a few slides, background on the Transportation Research Center and the two pieces of research that we discussed last week. So get started here. Just a quick overview. Again, the Transportation Research Center is at the University of Vermont. It was sort of formally established in 2006 with a grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation, their University Transportation Centers program. But there had been a long history of working with VTrans before that. The center is functioning within the College of Engineering and Mathematical Sciences at UVM. We have about 8 faculty and research staff that are sort of our core faculty affiliated with the center. Those are everything from like materials and like paving materials and geotechnical stuff, and then the policy planning. That's the work that we are going to talk about today. We don't offer degrees in the center, right? It's a research center, but we work with undergraduates, masters, and PhD students. So they're the ones that carry out most of the work. So they get lots of opportunities to work and earn money and be involved in our research. And then the center is actually also home to a bunch of sub-centers. And those include the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, which is a consortium led by UC Davis, which is also where I got my PhD. And that's another USDOT funded transportation center. There's also a Transportation Infrastructure Durability Center, which is led by the University of Maine, Vermont Clean Cities Coalition, which is a DOE funded effort. And we have, it's also the Northeast Transportation Workforce Center, which that has ended, but there's an effort to renew funding for that. So there's a bunch of other programs in our center. Overall, we are focused on doing 2 things. One is responding to the needs of the state, whatever those may be related to transportation. And then we have also focused our broader research efforts on understanding issues related to sustainability in small and rural communities. Most of what we understand about transportation policy and planning and the operation of transportation systems comes from research coming out of like large urban areas. And this makes sense. Originally, a lot of what we know comes out of dealing with congestion and air pollution. As we move to addressing issues of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, right? We don't necessarily, these things can occur in rural places, places without congestion, places without traditional air quality problems. And that means there's a big knowledge gap in just data, information. How do you address it? It's easy, for example, or easier to design a transit system, for example, in a congested urban place, because it provides a pretty attractive option, an alternative to sitting in traffic. But in a rural state where there's not a lot of congestion, right, our strategies and the ways we do things are going to have to be different. There's different challenges. So we're focused on trying to understand. We got the center is externally supported. So all of our funding comes from grants and contracts, mostly from other government agencies. There's a listing here, and additionally some nonprofits. Okay, so this is the first of two parts. So we're going to go over our research on mileage fees as a replacement for the gas tax.
So before we get into that, I think we should go around the table and introduce ourselves a little bit, because we're pretty well geographically spaced out around the state, representing a whole different type of, from urban to suburban to really. So, John, Representative Bartholomew, you want to start?
John Bartholomew, Heartland, Windsor, West Hampton.
Phil Hodgson High School, just outside of Burlington, right on Route 116. So we have a village with a state highway going through it.
I represent Shelburne. We're pretty much the same. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with our challenges on Route 7. We also have Route 7 has different characteristics through our town. Of course, the northern part is an outmoded car-oriented corridor, which we are hoping to revitalize with housing and economic development, make it very transit-oriented, because we're only 7 miles from Burlington. Then there's the portion within our village, which we are considering tools like possibly Class 1 highway status to help implement our community's vision for that. And then there's south of the village is an area that we are hoping to try and bring into the village as time goes on. So that's where we are transportation wise.
And Kate, what's your name?
Oh, Kate, sorry. Kate Lally. I just go straight to the streets, right?
Tim Porker and I represent John Bennett.
Which I represent Pittsburgh Proctor.
Leonora Dodge, I represent the town of Essex and a portion of the city of Essex Junction.
I'm Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, which of course is the intersection of 3 major highways, Interstate 91, going north and south, Interstate, US Route 2, east and west. And we anchor one end of the St. Johnsbury to Boston Expressway, right? It's Interstate 83.
And good morning, I'm Matt Walker from Swanton and Sheldon up in the northwest corner. And if you stay on 89 and you get past Burlington, you'll find us right before the Canadian border.
Hi, Patty McCoy. I represent Rutland 1, which is Pulteney, Ira, and of Wells. Our mode of transportation is 22A and Route 30. So no major interstate going through the western corridor. So.
All right.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay. So yeah, this research I'm about to talk to is led by myself and one of my graduate students, Claire Nelson. Here we are. And right, we've been talking about this a lot over the last 2 years. We've been doing a series of studies and discussing them in academic forums and other public settings. So this is sort of our slide deck that we've used for that. So the transportation funding problem, as I'm sure you're all aware, One aspect of it is declining gasoline consumption, which is driven by the adoption of alternative fuel vehicles, which is great. And also an increasing fuel economy of internal combustion engine, traditional vehicles, and lower VMT, although that's sort of turning around. There's also the declining purchasing power of the dollar, right? There's inflation. So we have those two factors, and this has been going on for decades now. So it's not new, but it's, there's a greater concern now with rapid inflation and our EV programs. So what do? There's lots of options, of course. You can raise the gas tax, you can index the gas tax to inflation. We could change vehicle registration, inspection fees, shift funding around from other streams, right? Local option taxes, income tax. There's mileage fees, which we're going to talk about today, and there's different flavors of those. There's tolling, congestion charging. We don't have a lot of congestion, so that doesn't really make a lot of sense here. But that's the program being adopted in Manhattan. We could try to be more efficient. So we've looked at many aspects of mileage fees, but not all of them. And these are sort of the criteria we think about with transportation policy and funding. So can we generate revenue? Is it politically feasible? Is it technically feasible? How equitable is it? And should also think about the economic efficiency of these things and the administrative feasibility costs, actually. Yeah.
When you say the economic efficiency, like meaning are you gonna be helping the economy grow versus stunting? Okay.
Yeah, so, there's, as you may know, right, different ways that we can try to collect revenue to keep the state functioning. Sometimes that has disincentives or incentives that can incentivize growth. It could be a drag on growth. There's and so that's always a consideration. Well,
Thanks.
lots of states are looking at mileage fees, right? Vermont's not unique. There's various pilots and demonstration programs going on. There are some states that have actually adopted programs. Those states that have, they're mostly take the approach of a opt-in to this new policy. Mileage fees are really attractive in a number of ways. It basically accomplishes what the gas tax originally was designed to do, which was to charge everyone a fee for the amount that you drive. When the gas tax was adopted, first in Oregon, most cars had the same fuel economy. You were pumping gas, so it's metered anyways. It was really easy to do. But now vehicles have vastly different fuel economies, and some vehicles just don't use gasoline at all. So it's moved from a user fee to now it's just a tax on gas that's not necessarily tied as much to how much you drive. There's the attractive part potentially, depending what your concerns are, that it acts maybe as a carbon tax because it's a tax on gasoline, but it's no longer really a tax tied to driving, and the original intention of the gas tax to pay for highway maintenance and construction. So some of the cons of mileage fee, well, there's not a lot of public support for them. There's concerns about privacy and fairness and costs, because how do you track how much people drive? And there's some uncertainty about the administrative costs of these schemes. So the first thing we did, we have some unique data in Vermont, and we used it to look at the issue of equity gas tax. So, and also what a revenue neutral mileage fee might look like. How this would impact Vermont households, and do the financial impacts if we compare the current situation with the gas tax to adopting a mileage fee. Again, generating the same exact amount of revenue, so we're not addressing the current revenue shortfall that may exist, but just what would that shift look like? So we have some really interesting data that we've been collecting for years now from the DMV. So we have vehicle inspection records. They're now collected electronically. They include an odometer reading by the technician that does the inspection. And we can look at subsequent inspections and get an estimate of how far you drive each year. So we do that, and we can calculate vehicle miles traveled. We also have the registration records, which have addresses. This allows us to, we can use the VIN numbers in them to get more information about the vehicle, which is important because it's how we can query the EPA's database on fuel economy. So we can look up the information that's on the sticker on the side of the car that shows the average fuel economy of the car. We can combine all that information together to get an estimate of how far vehicles in each household drive and what their fuel economy is, which allows us to evaluate, estimate how much each household pays in the gas tax and how much you might pay with a mileage-based user fee. And this using the vehicle inspection records is actually one of the ways states are considering estimating mileage for mileage fee additional because it addresses some of the privacy concerns. You don't know where people drive, you just have an estimate of annual mileage. We can put it all together to get these estimates for each household. So we know where the households are and how much of vehicles they have and how much they're driving. And this is kind of, I mean, this is what it looks like if you put it all together. We can have these really detailed maps. We aggregate them to a few square kilometers to protect privacy, the individuals and households. But we can see how the average travel of households varies over the state. Not surprisingly, it's lower in more urban areas and it's higher in more rural areas. And the fuel economy, there's also a pattern to that as well. So urban households tend to have more smaller cars, more fuel efficient cars than rural areas. We might have more pickup trucks, things like that. That has implications for the equity of these policies. So we use data from the Federal Highway Administration. They have a tabulation of the total amount of vehicle miles traveled in the state. And they also have estimates of the total tax revenue from the gasoline that's been sold. We can divide those two and get an estimate of, that's how we estimate the revenue neutral mileage fee. So we just take the total gasoline tax revenue and divide it by the total VMT estimate. And we use that information to look at the distribution of current costs paid by households for the gas tax and for an alternative mileage-based user fee. You can see the patterns look pretty similar on these maps. And the top line result here is there's not much of a difference. It's a very small change. The patterns are very similar in urban communities are going to pay less because they drive less and they have more fuel efficient vehicles. This is true for the gas tax and the mileage-based user fee. We just difference those two maps and show the difference here. And one thing you'll note is that first, this surprises many people, but you pay annually and the gas tax is actually pretty small. Most households are paying somewhere between $100 and $200 a year, and that's the entire household for all their vehicles together. The difference between these policies, most households are going to see a few dollars plus or minus. In this case, we see that most households are actually going to pay more. And this becomes because it's a transfer from heavy duty vehicles, which have very low fuel economies and very high mileage. They're going to pay a lot less on their mileage fee, which is just simply revenue neutral. And that cost now is more borne on households and the light duty vehicles. And so one thing we think needs to be considered is possibly having different rates for different classes of vehicles if there's some concern about this shift in costs. We didn't address whether this is fair or not, but this is just what it would look like. We can break down the change in costs by types of community, household income, and it's not a huge difference, but in general, lower income households and households in more rural areas would end up paying somewhat less than urban households and higher income households when we go from a gas tax to a mileage fee, right? And this is because rural households tend to have larger vehicles that consume more fuel, but when we go to mileage, so when we shift to the mileage fee where that fuel economy is not considered, actually save some money. The same goes for lower income households. Typically have older vehicles, and those vehicles have lower fuel economy than a new vehicle. So we see a little of that. Again, it's not a huge difference, but a mileage fee would generally be slightly more progressive, or more accurately, less regressive than the gas tax. Gas tax is regressive. Mileage fee would still be regressive, but less so.
You're looking at across all vehicles, all fuel vehicles, EV, fossil fuel vehicles and whatever else. So this data is for every car. Kind of every car that's driven in Vermont. So it's a kind of fair comparison.
Yeah, so these are the actual vehicles, their actual mileage. We don't have information on every vehicle. Their vehicles, there's error. The DMV database is very messy, but so we have some statistical techniques to fill in the holes.
Maybe Phil was first, but
Yeah, thank you. Going back to the chart before, the y-axis, is that percent
The
change?
those are that is the dollars. So it's very small.
Oh, okay, so it's $15.
Yeah, so we were looking here, right? We're looking
Yes.
at a few.
Yeah. Okay,
And right, they're generally all positive because of this
Yeah.
truck to house. Yeah, so again, very small numbers.
all right, thank you.
yeah, my question is, since you know the vehicle type, it would be possible to have a mileage-based user fee that also took into account the efficiency of that vehicle. And I'm just, maybe I'm getting ahead of.
All those things are possible.
Yeah.
All with
Okay.
additional administrative costs, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, well, is it that much? Well, whatever. Anyway, I don't know if you're gonna get to that, but maybe.
No, well, actually, we will. There are different when we talk about when we looked at perceptions, public perceptions, and opinions about mileage fees. There are. We did ask people about different restructures, not specifically that one, but something similar. So,
I guess I'm thinking about it more in terms of electric vehicles.
Mhm.
There's perhaps a social cost that could be taken into account with an electric pickup truck that is very inefficient compared to a Bolt or a Tesla Model 3 or something.
Yeah.
And maybe that should be taken into account. Maybe that's a policy question that you did talk about.
we didn't look at that specifically. It's an interesting question, and it is something we've heard in talking about this. And I think, we could talk for hours about these things, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. And I think one way to think about it too, another way is how you might deal with that on the electric rate side of things, right? So if you have a less efficient, big, electric vehicle, right? You could maybe do something with the fees for charging that vehicle that would, incorporate that concern, right?
As far as a charge.
If the current concern is it uses more energy,
Yeah.
you could try to do something with incorporating a fee or tax or disincentive into the cost of charging the vehicle rather than.
The KWH costs.
But
That's one way or another way.
that could be complicated, so I don't.
Another way of doing it is just to divide by the MPGE or something like
Yeah.
that. Take a flat rate.
Yeah, they have
For the MPGE.
they have the kilowatt hours per mile, and you could come up with different mileage rates for sure.
And it makes sense.
Yeah, but this is just really interesting. It seems like a way to go across apples and oranges, which we seem to increasingly have with this transition. But I'm kind of wondering, just big picture, in addition to being less regressive than the gas tax, which is to me a good thing, would this potentially capture more revenue? Because that is the point in the end, right?
Well, so we looked at, just to be able to make a comparison, more apples to apples, a revenue neutral change, right? So if you just adopted that, the benefit as far as the finances goes, at least they'll stop, you'll stop losing money as fast as you will with the gas tax, right? But you're not going to address, the shortfall that we currently, right? We can all look at the transportation infrastructure and know that it's needs to be more maintained. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. So the idea here is the mileage-based user fee would be more stable over time because it doesn't matter what fuel the vehicles are using. But you still have to address the issues of inflation and the fact that we're probably not collecting enough money to begin with. But those are separate issues.
Those are tough decisions that we have to make.
But you can stop the bleeding, but
Yeah.
it's the main message.
That's a good starting point.
Thank you. Yeah, just to sort of follow up on the question about, can you incorporate the efficiency into it? Yeah, just point out, it's already sort of incorporated. If you have an inefficient vehicle and you're buying gas, you're buying more gas per mile. If you have an inefficient electric vehicle or less efficient, then you're buying more electricity. So there's already that disincentive built in.
The idea could be like there is, a gas guzzler tax at the federal level for vehicles that get extremely low fuel economies. But that's more sort of by the manufacturer, the corporate average fuel economy standards. There's a whole scheme there. So, there's possibilities, but you're right. It consumes more electricity, so people are still paying in that way. All right, so that, so we just talked about this. The next thing we did, though, so this was to kind of take a look at what does this look like for Vermont, because we have this unique data. And there's a lot of equity concerns that we've heard about, and most of them are untrue. It's actually the opposite of what most people think. Rural households stand to benefit, save a little money. So study 2 is we actually wanted to look at public perceptions. There's a lot of misinformation and just a lack of understanding about what the gas tax even is and funds. And that our hypothesis, and this is based on other studies, is that just simply informing people about these policies can change their views and support for them. So we wanted to look at the current level of support for mileage fees to replace the gas tax. This was a national study. We also did a separate version pilot of this study in New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. How the support varies with a number of factors, and to what extent policy support changes when people learn more about the policy and maybe what it would cost them. And so we surveyed about 2,500 people across the country. It was a representative sample of the US population. The way it was set up is people were asked to vote on a sort of a fake ballot, whether they would support a mileage fee as a replacement for the gas tax. And we gave them 3 different options, which was a mileage fee based on odometer readings, so not very invasive, one based on a device that could log your mileage but didn't have a GPS attached to it. So, there was a less invasive, and then collecting the fee with a GPS enabled device, which it was explained to respondents that would enable you not paying the tax when you leave the state, for example. But it requires more information about where you are. In between, so we did this first vote to just ask them what they thought about the policy. Then we made some educational videos. You can go to this QR code if you scan it. If you go to our websites, you can watch them. They provided the history of the gas tax and what it's actually used for. So it usually goes into a highway trust fund of some sort. It's not the general fund, things like that. And then they were given a second opportunity to vote. And then the last thing is we asked people about the vehicles they drive and how much they drive, and we showed them a personalized cost comparison. And then they were allowed to vote again. So we looked at how learning more about the policy and what it would cost you affects your opinion. And then we asked a bunch of information about the people taking survey. And so what we found is respondents really don't know a lot about the gas tax. 54% did not know that the gas tax is an excise tax in most states, right? It's per quantity, not per dollar. So when gas prices are high, you're not paying more of the gas tax in most places. But there are some states do have more sales tax or some portion of it adjusts with the price of gas. Most people don't know when the state last increased their gas tax. Most people think it was, or at least half that it was sometime last year, but that's not true for most places. And 57% don't know what the gas tax was. So this is a big problem. You know virtually nothing about the policy, and you're being asked your opinion about changing it. And so this leads to, when you're doing public opinion research, people just guessing, or their responses aren't particularly informed. And so the information you get is not particularly reliable. And this is what the results look like. So we went through this and we go from vote one, which was just baseline. What do you think about replacing the gas tax? Yeah. With the mileage fee, only, there wasn't a whole lot of support, right? 30% of people indicated they would have support for this. After learning more about what the gas tax is actually used for, at about 50% support. Then learning about the costs, support dropped a little bit, but not very much. And what's interesting, even when people learned they would pay more, many people still supported the mileage fee. And this is largely, I think, because they learned that it's a very small change and there are some benefits to mileage fee.
Burke had her hand up.
I couldn't put myself in commenting on how hard it is politically to raise the gas tax versus this information that people don't really know anything about, but don't raise my gas tax when it comes up, but and of course, the federal gas tax has not been raised since 1993.
Yeah.
It's really, it doesn't feel, but
Well, that's,
very interesting.
I mean, that's very fine, right? Initially, right? Only 30% of the people support this change. If we asked them just about raising the gas tax, it would be something similar. We'd have about 20 to 30% of people supporting it. But once you learn that it goes into a trust fund that really only pays for transportation stuff most of the time, some of that information seems to increase support. And when you learn that, it's also, of all the taxes you pay, it's a pretty small, we'll actually think it's quite large. So it's interesting. And the videos were very short and easy. You could imagine some sort of public, some PSA that could be tried to see if that changes support. But we also did some more, sophisticated statistical modeling just to see if the changes were statistically significant. They are. You can see there's more support for the less sort of invasive versions of how you collect the fee. So if you use odometer readings, which is just an annual estimate of how much you drive, and no one has any idea where you drove, that had the most support, which isn't surprising. After learning more about the policy, support increased quite a bit. We asked how people perceive the fairness of the different fees in different classes. So, there's some differences in opinions, but generally people felt that mileage fee would be more fair than those that did not after learning more about the policies. And we did ask about rate structure. We asked about an income-based rate structure. So the idea that lower income households might pay a lower rate, pollution-based, which sort of gets at the question we were talking about earlier. Lower rates for EVs. People have raised concerns that this works against current incentive programs to incentivize EVs, and a block rate, sort of like you get a certain amount of mileage at a low rate, and then over some point you might pay higher rates, or maybe you get some free allocation, whatever it might be. We didn't go into the details, but so the one thing that stands out is sort of bundling this with some other policy objectives seem to increase support, although the idea of lower rates for EVs didn't enjoy much support. And so our key findings here really are that most people lack accurate information about gas taxes and mileage fees, and this affects people's support for those fees, but also affects how research studies that have been conducted on this topic and other public opinion polls you might see the reliability of that information. You ask someone about something they know very little about, it's hard to give accurate answer. Preferences for finding, they're not fixed. They're a reflection of a person's current level of policy knowledge and engagement with the policy. These simple educational experiences we provided, in this case, result in increasing support for a policy change to a mileage-based fee. And it's unclear from this simple experiment we did how durable this education is. So being engaged with this study for a few minutes in the survey, you express your opinions, 6 months down the road. Who knows? We're not sure, but that's something we hope to look into. And there's some things, of course, that just providing some information is not going to change. Some people are more informed. Some people want to inform. There are other factors, other reasons, other attitudes, beliefs, and intrinsic values that shape their opinion. So this, we're not looking to, in this case, our goal is not to manipulate people's opinions, but simply to provide unbiased or factual information, see how that affected it. So overall, for all our mileage fee work, mileage fees would generally be more equitable than the gas tax. Rural and low-income households would generally see smaller cost increases than urban or higher income households. And so there's some misinformation. A lot of people think it's the opposite, and that affects policy support. Definitely, mileage fee rates might be needed for personal and commercial vehicles, since this would be a big shift in who's paying the gas tax, from very low fuel efficiency big trucks to households. That might be a fair transfer. Maybe this is a fair way to do it or not. Trucks already pay a distance away fee and some other fees too. So that would have to be thought about instead of the more. States looking to implement mileage fees, addressing public concerns. If you want public support for your policies, it probably requires addressing some of this knowledge and information gap. Right. Overall, nationally, support's pretty low. This isn't the first study to show that. And some simple informational policy can increase that. There's a lot of misinformation about what the gas tax is and what it's used for. Cost information seemed really important. We asked people about this in several ways in our studies. And when people learn that the cost is relatively small to begin with, and that the change would be fairly small as well, that seemed to increase support. And it's something that a lot of people find surprising, that the tax isn't as large as they might think. Hawaii actually did a really unique study. They used the DMV data like we're using, and they sent out with registration renewals a survey, and they also told people how much they currently pay on the gas tax and what they might pay on the mileage fee.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I see you have a lot more slides, right? I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
And you may have said this, but when you were calculating the revenue neutral part of it, were you accounting for the fact that a pretty high percentage of the gas tax is paid by out-of-state drivers?
Yeah, so that kind of gets incorporated, right? Because what the data we use is the fuel sales in Vermont. So
Yes.
Which is sold to out-of-state and in-state drivers, and it's divided by the amount of travel in Vermont, which includes the out-of-state drivers as well.
How do you know that?
The Federal Highway Administration puts out those estimates, and the data is collected by VTrans. There's sensors on the roads that are moved around the little black strips you sometimes see.
Yeah.
There's a strategy, and there's a federal program to measure vehicle miles traveled, because it's used in the formula funding that the federal gas tax goes through to get back.
I didn't know about that piece of data. Okay, interesting.
So it's called the Highway Performance Measurement System.
Following through because of.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
So we kind of get at the out-of-state drivers. We'd still have to think about how to charge them, as we took that into consideration in the mileage.
Right.
So the public seems to have preferences for a less invasive way of coming up the mileage, determining their mileage, right? No one wants to be tracked more than we need to be. There's obviously benefits to being able to track, because you can deal with driving out of state versus in state and things like that. But reading odometers during the inspections we already have is relatively simple and probably administratively less expensive than other options. Right, and we just talked about that on the forum survey respondent issue. So that's the mileage fee work. And so the other thing we talked about the other day was the work on more addressing safety on rural roads in Vermont, particularly looking at different types of crosswalk technology, if you want to call it that way. In this case, the question was to look at rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Those are the signs with the flashing lights that you hit the button where you walk across the road. And there's these lighted or light embedded crosswalk signs as well. This work was done for VTrans. And these have been studied in urban context, but not so much in rural context. So that's what we were doing here. This work was also done by the other Dr. Rowan Gould, Dana, James Sullivan, our research scientist, and a PhD student, Parson. So I'm presenting on their behalf. The study is important. Pedestrian risks are higher in rural areas. It's 8% of pedestrian travel, but 19% of deaths. And there just hasn't been a lot of research in this context. There's not often a lot of crosswalks in rural places. And when we're talking about rural in this context too, we're talking about small towns too, and the transition from the state highway into the main street of the town, and some of those different types of situations. We look at these two particular technologies that could be added to a traditional crosswalk. They're relatively simple. VTrans was interested in these, and there's not a whole lot of maintenance. So it's something that's relatively easy to do. But the question, of course, is, does it actually do anything? Is it safe? Does it improve safety? So that was the research question. And what we did in this case is VTrans is going to go install some of these rapid flashing beacon and LED embedded signs. And so we had an opportunity to study these sites before they were implemented and afterwards, so we could have a nice before-after study. And we also included control locations. We picked different types of sites, and we evaluated sites that had crosswalks, but where no new signs were going to be added. So we could just see if drivers were becoming more or less safe towards pedestrians in general over time, or if it was actually the effect of the rapid flashing beacon or light embedded sign. So that was before after controlled study. And the idea is we can look at the difference in various types of outcomes. We look at different types of outcomes, like how much people yield to pedestrians and things like that. We'll go over that in a second. We had a paired control location. So another crosswalk in a similar environment, ideally in the same area, that wasn't going to get the treatment. Again, so we can just tell baseline how maybe travel behavior has changed regardless of the technology, since this happens over time. And then, we're going to measure the effect of the RFBs. So we can get a causal relationship. These are the different sites. There were 6 locations, here in Montpelier, Middlebury, Milton, Colchester, and Burlington. And I was going to skip through these. I put them here so you could look in more detail later, but these graphs show the change in the various outcomes we looked at for each of the sites. And so we looked at, for example, driver yielding rates, pedestrian waiting time, pedestrians that cross out of the crosswalk versus using the crosswalk, different indicators that these signs were doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I go through this, we have time, but there's a summary of all this here. So RFBs, they were effective in rural areas to improve compliance, and effectiveness is similar in transition areas and central areas. So when you're just coming into town from a state highway and in sort of the middle of the village center, the light embedded signs didn't seem to have they had no statistically significant impact. So the RFBs were more effective, and their effectiveness was similar in sort of the more urban part of a village center and towards the outskirts. So you don't put these things on state highways, obviously, where there's high speed limits and things like that. That would be dangerous. But so they seem to work well in a more rural context, a small town. That's the key takeaway. And again, it was a VTrans funded study. On this last slide here are actual links to the various reports and publications covering all of this research, which has been published in scientific journals. There's some research reports from the various sponsors. And you can find this information and a whole lot more about all the projects we do on our website. That's it.
Questions for that? John, I see your.
Going way back, how does congestion charging work?
Congestion charging works, so there are different ways to do congestion charging, but the scheme in New York City that's about to be implemented is based on something similar that's been done in London for over a decade now, which is there's a cordon area, so an area that geographic area that you determine is sort of the congested, usually urban center. And you charge a fee to enter it during the middle of the day or whatever you determine to be the busy part of the day where you want to discourage driving. And so it's usually a flat fee. You pay, whatever it might be, $15 to enter for the day.
Like a toll thing?
Yeah, it's a toll. And these days, the technology is pretty simple, makes it easy. So it's a camera that reads plates, yes, toll by plate. Same thing that's used on all the interstate highways outside of Vermont, right? And so that's.
Thank you. So you went through the data and you said we could look at it again. Was there any indication that an area where you put in, I'll say the flashing beacons, which seem to work, and the other ones probably people get used to because they're always on, right? Was there any indication that drivers were slowing or paying attention to other crosswalks that don't have it? So if you had, two without it and two with it, and
So it's a known issue that if you put too many of these in a row, they can lose their effectiveness, right? You just, it's.
yeah.
So if that's what you're talking about, that's not something that was looked at in this study specifically, but that's already a known concern that if you kind of overuse these, they lose some of their
Right.
uniqueness, which is what makes them.
Which that makes sense. I'm saying, like I'm thinking of my town, we put one in. And we have other crosswalks too that don't have one. Same road. I'm wondering if driver behavior gets better. Anecdotally, I think it does, but that's just.
It may. I don't actually know the answer to that question, but that's an interesting one. And I could ask the research team that did this. If there's been research on that, they probably know about it. That's not my area.
That's sort of the big hope that you're changing overall behavior.
Yeah.
Of drivers.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question to this. I was wondering about the positioning of these, so the distribution of them, I guess. So we often see them, within a village center or something, well, if you're lucky enough to get one. But what's so interesting to me is that the idea of using these as the transition zones. And I was wondering if that helped to reduce traffic coming into a village, which is often very challenging to do before it gets to the village core. And that would be a very interesting thing to follow up, almost like using these as sort of thresholds,
Are you saying as a way to control speed when you say traffic?
To say, hey, you are coming into a place where there are going to be people walking, and that if that lowers the speed, and that can then continues. We have a lot of like little linear villages and things, where we're just trying to get them to slow down for a little bit, and so that would be really interesting to see if the positioning of these is significant in any way.
Yeah, so I think we generally wouldn't recommend a rapid flashing beacon as a speed control measure, but we have just completed research, another VTrans funded study called our Rural Traffic Safety Toolbox, which addresses speed control measures on rural roadways. It's on our website. I can send information to the committee when I get back. But it's a whole bunch of basically like 2-pagers with factual information about proven safety countermeasures. And so these are measures, they're not research we did in this case, but we reviewed the research and found high quality research that demonstrates measures that are effective in a rural context to control speed. And there's different things that you can do in different types of contexts, like a transition zone. So we've got a report and some fact sheets and stuff like that. It's all on our website that I can send it to you.
Great.
In addition to this, but how do we address the tourists, the peaking season and Eclipse Day? All those cars that come in here and bought gas in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, it's drive all over our
Sure.
roads.
So capturing out of state, Vermont's unique in that small but close to a bunch of big places. We benefit from that tourism, but we wanted to also try to get out of state drivers to pay a fair share of using the roads. You know, there's no simple solution, but there's different things that can be done. I mean, so you could do what all our neighboring states do and toll the people on the highways. Maine, New Hampshire, to some extent, Massachusetts is pretty effective with that when you enter on the major highways. You know, these days you can toll by plate. So even if you don't have a transponder, which every neighboring state right now so probably have a toll pass anyways, you can charge, you know, we have a river, an international border and a lake. So there's only so many ways in and out. It's not that complicated. But there's a lot of political things to think about, right? People that live on the border and work in New Hampshire, the reverse situation. So the technology is there. It's really looking into the details of, you know, how it would affect Vermonters, out-of-staters, how it affects tourism and those type of things I think you'd want to consider. But there's no technical barriers, I think, at this point.
More questions? So first.
Oh, okay, thanks. Did I really beat Phil? All right.
Keep it keep it
Put on the draw. Is this a major suck on our like gas tax revenues equivalent, like of having out-of-state drivers, or do we also have a lot of our state drivers that gas up outside of the state? Does it even out?
I don't have the answer to that question. I think we have some of the data we've used for our mileage fee studies. We could possibly estimate some of that effect. I mean, we can use some statistics that are out there about the amount of driving that's from out of state and think about how much they're contributing to gas tax. We don't really know about the gas, so it's not easy.
Not a trade-off. We go over there.
Right, I mean, I think about the border with Quebec, and
Yeah.
everybody's gassing up in Vermont
Sure,
before they
sure.
cross.
Yeah, so maybe it's a wash. It's
Yeah.
not something I've looked at in detail.
So Representative Couch, you're.
Yeah,
Clean up.
two quick questions. One, any of the states that are doing mileage base, what have they done with their gas tax? And then, are there any states that are, you know, are there any toll systems that say, only hit out of state license
Well,
plates? I'm curious if they do that.
I mean, since they told by plate, it's probably possible. You know, I think the way you might do it is ideally people have transponders in their car. So if you were from out of state and we were pulling out of staters, it could be sort of, you know, so I could think about it if we had this advantage of a mileage fee program where there is some sort of transponder. So we don't charge you when you go to another state that's going to try to charge you. And then maybe, you know, everyone with a transponder doesn't get pulled. And there's those with plates without transponder would, or, you know, you could work on schemes like that. What's going on currently is the programs that have been adopted and are being tried in other states are opt-in. So you have the gas tax, and if you want to use the mileage, if you want to try the mileage fee instead, you can opt into that.
And how do you not pay the gas tax?
Right. So there's different ways to try to do that as well. So there can be a transponder or an RFID type thing on a car that can signal to a gas pump to charge you the gas tax. Otherwise, I think it would be some scheme to be refunded every year when you settle up. So, and I don't know, it's very quick changing, so I don't know all the details of all the different pilot programs and how they're working out. And there's also the issue of like, do you pay all at once? Do you pay over time? And so there's a lot of different things going on right now. And most of them though are some sort of opt-in to kind of learn about it and allow people who want to try it out to the opportunity to do so. And I think it's a good approach because it can get over some of the resistance and it allows some learning about how it works both from the user perspective, the public, but also from the states that are trying to implement these and learn how to do it. So, and another thing we didn't talk about, there's no reason to get completely rid of the gas tax while putting up a mileage fee. Additionally, if you want to maintain some portion of it as an environmental fee or a carbon fee, you don't, you might reduce the gas tax, but you could keep it too. So to get around the EV issue, we can charge everyone for using roads and the maintenance, congestion issues. And if you want to leave some portion to address carbon emissions, air pollution, stuff like that, that's also still an option. So it's not necessarily either or as well.
So, thank you.
Yes.
PSA for the, don't take off, but go to lunch, because I have some instructions for you at the end of the session. Dr. Rosenwald's been invaluable information. We're in the infancy of trying to figure out what's next. Certainly given us a lot of things to think about over the summer into the next session. Hope we've given you a flavor of what we're thinking about and how we're thinking. And I'm really glad we met you last week, because it's very, very informative today.
Yeah.
And I sure do appreciate you coming up here, coming into the State House. Don't be a stranger. You can come back anytime. We don't have to invite you. So far, it's an open door policy here. And I do appreciate you coming up.
It was good to hear that the AOT, you're working together, because when I first walked in, I'm like, this is the gold mine of information. And, so that's good, but I don't think in now 2 years, I've never heard the AOT say, well, we're working on that from UVM. So that's just
yeah,
good information.
and like I said, not all this, we work with AOT as much as they have budget and stuff for.
Yeah.
And it's something that since I've started here, we've been trying to find ways to work more with them. We do have, as I mentioned, so the safety work has been funded by AOT, and the mileage fee work was funded by USDOT. And then we are starting a new project with AOT on looking at EV incentives and other electric incentive programs and their equity, using some of this similar data I shared today. So that'll be a project we're starting with AOT next year, next academic year.
Thank you. And would you be available for a few minutes after we're done? Yeah, if a committee member had a question for you out in the hall or something.
Sure. And I really hope that I appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak. So we go both ways. We do all our work, and it's nothing more that academic enjoys than seeing someone actually make use of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So for the committee, we are not scheduling any more testimony now to the end of the session, but check the agenda every day, find out if something pops up. You'll see something on the agenda. Don't assume that if we don't have something on the agenda for late tomorrow at 9, there's not going to be something going on. Tomorrow we start conference committee.
The chief.
Downstairs, Senate Transportation on at tomorrow at 9, Thursday at 9 to 10, 3:45, Friday 11:30.
So tomorrow at 9,
Yeah, so we'll get it on the board.
that'd be great, yeah.
Post it, so you'll know where we are. But just please keep checking the agenda, so you don't miss something like today.
Yeah.
We would really
Yeah.
hated to miss
Yeah.
testimony. So with that,